and welcome to another episode of Just Listen, your destination for relaxation. You may notice that my voice sounds a little different right now, and that's because I've been sick for the last month or so. I think I had COVID, and I had that for about 2 weeks, and then the COVID seemed to be getting better, and now I've gotten either the same thing again, or maybe the flu, maybe a cold, something, but either way, my throat has taken a real beating over the last month from so much coughing, and so I couldn't really do ASMR videos where I was talking because I would cough through the middle of it, or my voice was just completely gone. And it has been quite frustrating having this really bad cough. Well, I've been going to work anyway because the same people I've been around seem to have also gotten the same sickness, so we're just all working through it. The frustrating thing is that I can't sleep very well, and I don't have the energy to do extra things at home, and I can't go to the gym because I'll cough and I'll infect other people. So it's been quite boring, and it actually doesn't feel like my cough is going to go away anytime soon. So I may still be coughing like this in a month's time, but I guess I've just got to keep struggling and plodding along and hope things get better. So I decided to make a ramble video. I'll just talk about what's been going on lately and really just say whatever comes to mind at the time. So just as I was getting over the first round of sickness where I thought it was COVID, because somebody I worked with went to New Zealand with his girlfriend, and when they came back they were both sick, and she tested positive for COVID but he tested negative, which, you know, those rat tests aren't very accurate, or rather they're very accurate when they give you a positive, but when they give you a negative there's a strong chance it could be a false negative. I took that as though he had COVID, and then I got sick with the same thing he had, and I tested myself but I came up negative. So I told everyone around me that I probably had COVID, but I tested negative, but let's just be safe. So I sort of quarantined myself in a room at home, sleeping on the floor in the study because we don't have an extra bed, and I don't want to get an extra bed. We don't really have the space for it. So I've been sleeping on the floor. It's actually surprising. It's not that uncomfortable because at least it's nice and flat. So that's been alright. And I've got to be honest, it has been kind of nice just having the privacy to get up and like make an ASMR video, or, you know, do what I feel like doing. Like I can make myself a cup of tea and not worry about waking the people up. But the main reason, because we figure by now everyone in the family has been exposed to it anyway. The only reason I'm not sleeping with my partner is because I wake up and cough just constantly, and she wouldn't be able to get to sleep, and the baby as well. Like, he sleeps in the room, so if I'm constantly waking up and coughing, they can't get to sleep. So at this point I really just have to get over the cough as quickly as I can, because it makes it impossible to go to the gym and I had been trying to go to the gym almost every day. But for the last month, I've only gone one time, and that was just after I recovered from the first round of illness, and then just before the second round of illness started. So I've really been missing out. When I go to the gym, I usually just get on the stair climber, and lately I've been doing an hour on the stair climber, and I listen to podcasts. But lately I've been sick, and when I can't get to sleep at night time, I listen to podcasts. So because I can't get to sleep because I'm sick, I listen to all my podcasts, and then they're all done, they're all listened to, which isn't very good because I can't find any other podcasts that I'm interested in. So I've listened to it all. Of course, I also listen to ASMR, but mostly I do that when I'm trying to go to sleep. But if I've got a cough that's bothering me every 5 seconds, then I don't really want to listen to ASMR, because it's like you can't get into that relaxed state in the first place. So if you can't get into the relaxed state, I just sort of can't get into the ASMR, which is a real shame. So when I was really sick, I made an ASMR video just from synthesized sounds that I made in VCV Rack, and I don't know how good it was, but I just put it out there because I thought, let's just do something. Let's try something new. I was coughing so much that even if I wasn't trying to talk into the microphone, if I was using a microphone at all, it would just catch me coughing all the time. So I listened to all of my podcasts, and I didn't have any podcasts to listen to anymore. So I got Audible, and I was listening to Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky, and I got a few chapters into it, but unfortunately I don't know if it was the writing style or it was the fact that all the names are Russian and I'm unfamiliar with Russian names, so I forget people's names, and I don't know who the narrator is talking about when he uses the name. So I kept sort of losing track of what was going on, and I'd go back and re-listen to the chapter about 3 or 4 times before I go on. So I wasn't making much progress, and it's quite a long book. So I don't know, maybe I should get back into that. I kind of like the soft, soothing tone of the narrator, and I like to, part of the reason I like to talk in ASMR is because I want to develop the skill of being able to talk into a microphone for a long period of time and to get my voice to sound the best it can. Of course, right now, it's probably not quite up to scratch because it's quite scratchy. But, it's something I kind of enjoy. I find it relaxing, but I can't quite relax when I'm listening to a long, complicated novel like Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky, because I get the sense that I really need to pay attention because it's a long book, and if I get 3/4 through and I've missed an important detail, I feel like I have to go all the way back and reread. But because I can't follow it all very well, I keep re-listening to the chapters. So I mean, I don't have this problem when I read novels, but of course, because I'm quite busy, I get home from work and my brain is kind of fried, so I don't get to read books as much as I used to. I think I need to choose a book that's more of a page turner or easier to understand without having to think too hard, because oftentimes when I'm listening to Audible, it's at a time of day when I'm winding down and relaxing, so my brain isn't really firing on all cylinders. The time when I did the most reading was when I was studying at university. Part of my double degree, I studied English literature and creative writing, and also Spanish language, and part of that was to read some Spanish literature. And so I studied a lot of different fictional texts, and the type of fiction that I probably enjoyed the most, or that had the biggest impact on me, was the modernist and some of the postmodernist literature. So it was a little while ago that I studied English literature, but some of the authors that I enjoyed the most were Franz Kafka, Clarice Lispector, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Nathaniel West. Because especially with postmodern literature, it was really, it would sort of hit you, like it wouldn't give you what you were expecting. So, you get accustomed to a particular type of narrative, or to a particular, you get accustomed to a certain style in literature. And postmodern literature was really playing with that and trying to pull it apart and break it. And I was in my 20s, and this really seemed exciting to me, because I hadn't really thought about what would happen if you subverted all of the norms. And it was also the first time that I ever really considered the fact that when you tell a story, you're really presenting a picture of what you think reality is like. So the things that you choose to put into your story reveal what you think about the way the universe works. That is, it reveals the author's metaphysics. As part of my assessment in postmodern literature, I wrote a comparative essay about The Rings of Saturn by W.G. Sebald and The Unfortunates by B.S. Johnson, and I compared the metaphysical implications of both of those novels. Now, I use the word novels kind of loosely, because neither of those books really followed a normal formula for a novel, because, for example, The Unfortunates by B.S. Johnson, it was a box, and you open up the box and you have some single pages, and you have some little pamphlet sized sets of pages, and none of these pieces were numbered. So the intention of the author was that you read through the novel in whatever order you happen to pick up, so you're getting pieces of it. And I guess to summarize the story, it was basically just about a character who was, his best friend, or one of his close friends, was dying of a terminal illness, and each section that you would read would just be part of his experience with that friend. And I think the point of the whole storyline was that there was really no rhyme or reason to it, that it just happens, that some people just have to suffer, and that maybe connected to why there's no particular order for reading through all the different parts of the book. Now, that paints a pretty grim picture of reality because you have a sense there's no purpose. Things happen with no grand design in mind, and like one event doesn't even lead into another event because there's a randomness to the order that you're reading through the events. And so that's quite jarring for somebody who is sort of accustomed to the normal conventional structures of storytelling, and it paints a bleak picture. So it's a very malevolent sort of metaphysics that the author is expressing. And if you look at B.S. Johnson's personal beliefs and the things that he said about literature, it's quite interesting. For example, he sort of said that fiction is just lies. If I remember that properly, he said it's just lies because I think he believed that the structure of the way fiction was told presented a wrong view of how life is. And so he really pulled that structure to pieces, literally, when he wrote that book. So The Unfortunates didn't leave me feeling good when I finished reading it, but it was an interesting experience, and it opened my eyes about the way literature can present a metaphysical value judgment. So I took that book and I compared it with The Rings of Saturn by W.G. Sebald. And The Rings of Saturn, it sort of took the opposite approach, I would say, in a certain sense. And this was really interesting. It's like when you choose a topic for an essay before you've really done the research yet. Often that question or that topic that you choose for yourself turns out not to be very fruitful because you hadn't already done the research or the reading or the thinking before you came up with the question. But when I did come up with that question, it just really opened up to me, and I really learnt a lot as I got through writing the essay, because The Rings of Saturn took a similar but opposite kind of attitude to the chaotic, malevolent, unpredictable metaphysics that I observed in The Unfortunates. Now, I don't really remember the concrete details of The Rings of Saturn, but basically it was a meandering sort of historical account, historical and descriptive, because in some parts it would be describing something that was happening throughout history relating to people, and then in other parts it was just looking at like a building falling apart and trees growing through it and things like that. I don't really remember that much, but there was a very consistent theme throughout all of this, as it would go from one place to another place, to another event, to another event. And that theme was that something would fall apart under its own decay, and as it would decay, it would fall apart, and it would die, and it would rot, or it would be cast into chaos, or like there was one section about the silk trade, when the production of silk was still a secret, how they were doing it, and then the secret was out, and then it was chaos. But every one of these scenarios resulted in a change, and after the order was destroyed and cast into chaos, it would then re-establish another order afterwards. and so it was always it was always oscillating between entropy and extropy. But it was sort of demonstrating that there was a sort of eternal process by which things fall apart and then they reassemble themselves in another form, which was quite encouraging. It kind of painted a picture that chaos isn't all that bad, because it destroys but it also creates. And it was much more, I guess you could say, Zen or Stoic, in that the value judgment that you put on the things being destroyed would then, the negative judgment that you would have about something being destroyed would then be met by the reassurance that something else would be created in its place. And so it was like time just moves on, and there's no need to be too gloomy or depressed. And so you can see that relates to the chaos that we saw in The Unfortunates, where the protagonist's friend just died. There was nothing he could do about it, and there was no reason for it, and nothing to be gained. Sort of like there was no lesson to be learned from it, and no higher purpose. The same is true in The Rings of Saturn. Only it's not such a bad thing, and there's always something else that will come out of it later. Now, I really don't remember if that essay was any good the way I ended up writing it, because back in those days, sometimes I'd have the ideas in my head, but then the way they'd come out would be wrong. So I may have written a really good essay. I think for this subject as a whole, I got a high distinction, so I think I did well in the subject from my other assessments as well. But the point isn't really how well I wrote the essay. The point was that I learnt something that really stuck with me, not so much about the texts themselves, but more it was about what you can do with a text and what you can illustrate with fiction. In my studies, and I've studied at university for way too long, actually way too long. But of all the studies that I did, I think that subject, postmodern literature, was probably I gained the most knowledge and the most sort of enthusiasm from that course. And it wasn't because the teacher was good, although the teacher was good, but yeah. And it's funny now because in hindsight, I don't think that postmodern literature is necessarily the best kind of literature, and I'm not necessarily interested in reading more postmodern literature. But what postmodern literature was doing at that time was it was taking new approaches to telling a story. It was teaching me about what fiction is, or what literature is, or what it does, or what it used to do, and the fact that you don't have to write in a way that has been done before. You can take a completely new approach. You don't have to create your art in a format that has been done before. You can find new ways of conveying conveying what you want to convey. There was some postmodern literature that I was a little less excited by, and so I don't remember that, but I remember there was a novel called Malloy by Samuel Beckett, and it sort of walked you through the experience of a person whose brain doesn't really work right, and either I didn't really get the value out of it, or there wasn't that much value to be got. but I don't know, I found it mildly amusing. I felt it was a little too long for what I thought it was trying to say, and I'm still not really sure what it was trying to say. But that's Samuel Beckett. I saw a couple of plays by Samuel Beckett. One which had Alan Rickman in it, which was very strange. I couldn't really follow the storyline at all. And there was another play that was just, I guess you could almost call it an interpretive dance, but it was a group of people dressed in really odd costumes, and they were walking across, like, I guess it was a set of stations, a set of markers on the floor, and they seemed to just be walking randomly from one to another, all separately, and there was music that played in the background as they did it, and it just seemed utterly random, and I couldn't really follow what was happening or what I was supposed to get from it. And what I remember is the tutor who was showing it to us, he read some secondary texts from postmodern theorists, and I don't understand what they were saying, and I couldn't understand it at the time. Now, he read that to us, and he said, "It is difficult to understand," and he sort of just left it at that. Now, I've always had the opinion that when a teacher says this content is difficult, that there's a little bit of shenanigans going on somewhere. Like if you write an essay that is extremely hard to follow with lots of run-on sentences and lots of jargon, and then you step back and say, well, it is difficult to understand, I get the sense that it's deliberately being esoteric for the sake of creating a mystique, and sadly I think that's the direction that a lot of postmodern art has headed in lately, and it's really unfortunate because when you pretend that there's great meaning in something that doesn't possess great meanings, that also it makes it impossible for people to appreciate the things adjacent to it, which may be actually quite valuable. So, for example, if you want to destroy an artwork, rather than say it's terrible and tell people not to look at it, what you could instead do is take something that is terrible, put it next to it, and say, this is just as good as that. And so when they don't understand the thing that is no good, they then turn to the thing that is good, and they also can't see what's good about that because they can't look for it, because they've been confused and befuddled by nonsense. And I'm not sure, I'm not sure that Samuel Beckett was nonsense. I think there was probably something of value in there, or in parts of it, but I didn't understand it, and I started to get the sense that other people who didn't understand it were pretending that they did, and I think that's a really bad thing in art appreciation. If you don't understand something, you really need to admit that you don't understand it, because as soon as you start to lie, as soon as you let fake appreciation enter into your own mind, and then the minds of the people around you, suddenly um, the whole thing can be corrupted, and you're all just pretending to gain value out of something that you don't value at all. It's like the emperor's new clothes. Because you don't want to be thought to be a Philistine, you pretend that you understand something when there's nothing there to be understood. Or if you don't understand something and there is value in it, maybe you just don't understand it, and maybe it's just not for you, and that's okay, and you should be able to admit that. But the purpose of art isn't to look at it and not understand and smile along with your friends. It's supposed to make you feel something, and ideally it would make you feel something that you want to feel and that is worth feeling, and that may make your life a little clearer and a little easier to deal with. It's sort of fuel for your spirit so that you can then go to work again and feel like you know what you're doing, and that you know what it's all about, and that it's worth it. Some art makes you feel bad, and it doesn't mean it's bad art, because sometimes the purpose is to make you feel bad. I guess sometimes the artist will make something that looks ugly because they're sort of making a point. They're trying to get your attention about something about life that's ugly, and they're trying to convey that to you, so that may be like a valuable thing. But bad art, I think, is art that fails to make you feel anything at all. So maybe if you were the first person to look at a Jackson Pollock painting and you see that the way it's sort of created in a messy kind of way, that may have some effect on you. But when you've been through an art gallery full of works done by people copying Jackson Pollock's style, and then you get to number 87, you can't particularly distinguish it from any other pieces that you remember. Maybe that's your fault. Maybe you're not paying enough attention. But the point is, you look at it and you don't feel anything. That is art not fulfilling its purpose. When you're an artist, you're saying, look at this. And how would you feel if you had a friend who kept saying, hey, look at that? You'd turn your head and it'd be like a seagull. Hey, look at that. It's a tumbleweed. Hey, look at that. It's like a horrific car crash. You don't want to look at that. You know, when you're an artist, you're saying, hey, look at that. Only say that if it's something worth looking at. It might be worth looking at because it's pleasant to look at, or it might be worth looking at because they'll learn something. It might just be really different from anything they've seen before, and that alone is worth looking at, because like I didn't know that sort of thing could exist. And that's pretty cool when you see something for the first time and it broadens your mind. And music is kind of unique among all the different forms of art, because with art, normally it takes some thought for you to understand what's in it and what kind of emotional reaction you're going to have. You have to process it a little bit. I mean, sure, there might be a painting, as soon as you glance at it, it looks pretty, you like it as soon as you look at it, maybe, but usually the greater value comes with sculpture and paintings and most visual art, especially movies and literature. That takes some thought for you to glean the value from it. But music is unique because it really just hits you, even if you're not thinking about it. It just sort of bypasses your conscious mind and goes straight to your emotions. If I told you to listen to the Dam Busters March by Eric Coates, you would describe the feeling you get probably the same way as I would. We both know the emotions that are brought up. Whether you like that type of music or whether you don't like that type of music, you'll feel the same basic feeling. It's joyful, giddy, and gay, and there's a hint of sentimentality in a couple moments. Now, you may not like giddy, gay, or sentimental music, but you won't disagree that this piece of music is giddy, gay, and sentimental. Classical music seems to me to be the type of music where the emotions are the most universal. The more complicated the style of music, or the more unfamiliar the style of music, the more divergence there may be in people's emotional reactions to that music. So, for example, a lot of people say they find bebop music really hard to understand or hard to listen to, and they don't get much emotional response. So, because they don't make sense of the sounds that they hear, they can't get any feelings from it other than the discomfort of being confused by the sounds that they hear. It just sounds like disorder, just noise to them. But when you get some familiarity with bebop music, the complexity of it actually is kind of stimulating to the listener. And with somebody like Charlie Parker, you may find that the melodies are actually quite joyful and bright. Or you might listen to some music that's just like a constant sounding drum beat with very, very slight variations over time. And it seems like that beat just goes on forever, exactly the same. But what you find is the longer you listen to it, the more familiar you get with the way the beat actually is. And then you start to hone in on every little detail. And then when the slightest change happens, it means a lot more. Sometimes music will defy your expectations, or sometimes they know what you're waiting for and they hold off on you for a long time. Like In the Air Tonight by Phil Collins. You're waiting for that drum beat to drop, and he holds back for ages. And then he finally brings it in. And it's not that complicated, but because you've been waiting for it, it just means so much more. You get those moments in art sometimes. You experience it once, and then it stays with you for the rest of your life. Maybe you don't even know why, but for whatever reason, it has this big impact on you, and that's what it's about. Thank you for listening to my disjointed ramble. I hope that as I recover from my cough, I can make more ASMR videos for you in the future on Just Listen, your destination for relaxation.